Joining me now live is Labor MP Ed Husic. Ed, very fiery question time, probably the best one we've seen all week.
Well, it was a little bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, so what do you make of the accusation coming from the Liberals that you guys are running a smear campaign against Gladys Liu?
Look, fun fact, I spent $10,000 on legal fees to establish I'm not a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and can sit in the Australian Parliament, yet we can have the coalition say it's offensive to test the loyalties of the member for Chisholm. I think this is more about scaring people off from asking legitimate questions that have been raised instead of getting to the bottom of things. So I think, this certainly won't stick. I think people will ask questions and they will not be scared off by Scott Morrison trying to make some fairly over-the-top claims as to motivation behind the questions.
Now, that's quite a different issue when you say that you had to prove you weren't a citizen of another country. We all followed the Section 44 saga, but for her, there's no doubt about her citizenship. It's the fact that she's been a member of these organisations which could have links. But what the Liberal Party is saying is she's facing undue scrutiny because of her Chinese heritage. No,
that's not the case at all. And sorry, that whole discussion around Section 44 was, if you look at the way that section exists in the Constitution, is about testing whether or not you would come under the influence of another nation. And so, I had to go through it. I understand the reason why we had to establish our bona fides, as it were. You need to be able to demonstrate that you wouldn't be coming under the influence of another nation. And so I don't think that actually, while I take on board your question, I don't think necessarily that there is a difference. I think it's a legitimate question in the public space to be asking.
Now, there were also questions asked of the Prime Minister about the fact that her statement, more likely than not, was drafted by the Prime Minister's office. If that is true, what is the concern with that? This is a highly volatile issue. She's a very inexperienced backbencher, as we saw in the interview with Andrew Bolt. What's wrong with the PM helping out with the press release?
Because we need to be able to understand directly from the member for Chisholm that those answers need to be provided to legitimate questions. We today, earlier in the Parliament, simply moved for the member to be heard in Parliament to explain and give their side of the story, and that opportunity was declined by the government. Apart from the Prime Minister's office helpfully putting forward a statement to best represent her position, I think it's up to the member for Chisholm to do that for herself and to be able to answer those questions. Now, it was asked on Sky the other night. Questions were put to Gladys Liu. Obviously the answers weren't satisfactory at all. Then we had to have an acknowledgement the next day. And I think it's important people get a full set of details about what's gone on and not have the Prime Minister engage in distraction using highly emotive language to avoid scrutiny.
Is there anywhere else left for Labor to go, in particular around these accusations that ASIO was already looking into Gladys Liu and that they were aware that ASIO was concerned? These are the reports coming through from ABC and Herald Sun. Is there any arsenal left in Labor's belt if you couldn't suspend standing orders and get her to front up to Parliament?
I think the test is for the government. The government's keen to set tests for Labor. Really, this is a test for itself. To step forward and to provide those details, principally through the member for Chisholm being forthright and explaining what has gone on, and to give assurance that they can sit in the Parliament and dutifully represent the interests of our country. I don't think that is an unreasonable proposition, because we have all been asked that, particularly people from backgrounds where our parents came from overseas. It's ultimately we've had to, or grandparents, we've had to answer those type of questions. I don't think it's unreasonable.
Now, when it comes to David Littleproud's comments, you guys got 2 questions away in question time about whether he thinks climate change is man-made. What do you make of his reasoning that he said he's just a Year 12 educated farmer?
He said poor and humble,
yeah.
Which I think a lot of people would take a exception to. I don't think... poor, humble, we'll leave that to other people.
It might be man-made, you never know.
But he's made a big... Well, he can't be humble anymore, because his statement denying the link of man-made activity to climate change has made the international press. So he ain't humble no more. So, you know, I think it's evidence, I believe. We constantly have these, you know, we believe that the government should take a much more active role in addressing climate change and in particular curbing emissions that people are saying are having an impact on our climate. We believe that they've dragged their feet on this, and you know, the problem with what David Littleproud has said is just giving a reinforcement in the minds of many that they're not really taking this seriously.
Well, he does say that he was interrupted, and there was a division,
Yes, by
I'm told, right after.
By man-made division bells. Good excuse. I love it.
And when it comes to Labor's own policies, this is a discussion you're having at the moment about your climate policy. So you're not going to meet your emissions target by 2022 because you don't get to implement the plan. But the discussion is that you should be aiming for net zero emissions by, sometime in the 2030s. Is that really realistic?
Well, a number of things. Obviously, we're going through that process of review. I notice there's a lot of interest and I'm getting inquiries from journalists who are saying, what are your policies going to be? And I keep saying that I don't believe there's any need for rush by Labor. You know, this is the start of a 3-year, ostensibly, or assume a 3-year parliamentary term. We will, you know, release our policies in due course. The pressure now is on the government to stump up policy, to have some sort of agenda to get things done. And, you know, our role in that is to hold them to account. So any discussions that are being had along the lines of the question that you've asked me about where we might head, that'll happen internally. I think obviously the world is working. There are many parts of the world where they've taken this issue seriously. And if you've had governments in the UK and in Germany, look what they need to do longer term to make a contribution, as are other governments. You know, really the pressure is on our government, as has been evidenced recently by Pacific Island nations questioning whether or not the government is sincere in dealing with climate change. You know, that stuff has to be dealt with by them. And I don't think we need to rush the development of policy.
When you are criticising the government policy, it's very easy for them to say, well, what's your alternative? And if you don't have an alternative, how do you mount a proper criticism of government policy?
Look, I know that will, and that line of questioning will particularly take hold as the parliamentary term progresses. But we will develop our policies in due course after we've reviewed the policies that we took to the election, and take on board what people have said and consider what needs to happen. And again, I do not think we need to meet anyone's artificial target, and it is frankly a distraction by Conservatives. Conservatives want to keep putting the question back as to what Labor is going to do because it's a great distraction from them not having a plan to do anything. And I, would simply urge, and I think my colleagues are of the same view, we are not going to get caught in a Conservative game that is simply about them distracting from really, they're in government, they're supposed to be responsible for acting, they've got a job to do, and frankly, I'll just be as blunt as I can, no one cares about Labor policy at this point in time because we're not the government, we don't have an election soon, people want to know what the government's going to do.
Well, I think the voters might want to know about Labor too, but we do have
no, I totally get that. No, look, I'm not being dismissive of that point. I absolutely get that. And voters will and have to be treated with respect, but I think voters have a much more realistic view that at the start of a 3-year term, it's the government's job to get on with governing.
Labor MP Ed Husic, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Annalise.